Imagine your foot is on a mine and the air is so cold it seems to slice at your breath. That single detail, weight, frost, a sudden hush, became the whole world for a young woman walking in captivity across late 1944 Western Germany. It was a moment when hidden danger and human protocol met, and when a small, careful response altered what a captured group expected in the worst of times. By late 1944, the Western Front was unraveling. Front lines shifted almost hour by hour. Retreating units had strewn fields and hedgerows with mines and other devices meant to delay an enemy. Many of these were pressure-activated, simple mechanisms set to explode under weight, or improvisations left behind in haste. Markers were often missing, and the countryside that had once been a patchwork of farms and lanes had become a landscape of concealed hazards. Among those on the move that autumn were women taken prisoner, clerks, nurses, signals auxiliaries, women who had worked behind the lines and were not expected to face combat. They had heard warnings, rumors and orders about brutality, about the thin mercy of war. They had been told to expect the worst. Fear, then, was the steady undercurrent of their movement. Fear of the unknown, fear of retaliation, fear of the ground beneath their feet. If you value overlooked stories from Y2, consider liking and subscribing. It helps keep these memories alive. The column moved along a narrow, frozen road that ran between fields crusted with frost. Breath fogged in the air. Boots crunched on gravel. The prisoners walked under the watch of American guards. The mood was taut and low. Few words, many eyes. For most of the march, the danger felt diffuse. Mines could be anywhere, under soil or hidden in ruts. Where retreat had been hurried, those dangers were especially common. Devices were sometimes planted hurriedly and left without records. That made every step an act of calculation. She was young. She sensed something different under her boot, a subtle give, a change in the way pressure settled. It was small, a nuance in the feeling of the ground that others would have missed entirely. She lifted her hand, quiet but clear, and spoke in German to the guards nearest her. "Please, my foot is on a mine." The simplicity of the sentence belied the weight it carried. For a moment the world contracted. The column stopped. Voices dropped to hushed German whispers. The American guards, trained to handle dangers like this, moved with a particular stillness. Training mattered here. Mine awareness and battlefield discipline, procedures that prioritized measured action over panic, were the difference between catastrophe and survival. The officer among the guards took in the scene at a distance. He did not shout. He did not rush. Distance mattered. So did the way people moved. Two soldiers approached under the officer's direction, advancing only where the ground had been tested or was known to be safe. A blanket, simple canvas, standard issue, was produced and held up, not as a spectacle but as a shield of sorts, a way to give the detained woman some privacy and warmth while the work proceeded. Close now, the woman's breath came shallow and quick. Her foot, trapped in that tense minute, felt pins and needles. Cold had settled into the flesh. She did not scream. Her voice was steady enough to be heard, requesting, insisting, an assertion of agency in a situation designed to remove it. The soldiers spoke in low tones. One placed a hand behind her calf. Another steadied her thigh. Each movement was deliberate. They unweighted the foot. They removed the boot with careful, practiced motions. The mine stayed silent. There was no dramatic explosion, no sudden rupture of sound, only a long-held breath and the small noises of fabric and leather. When she was clear, the woman sagged. Tears came quietly, the kind that arrive after adrenaline ebbs and the body accepts the relief of survival. Others in the column allowed themselves a small movement. Hands that had been clenched relaxed, a collective exhalation that did not seek applause. The soldiers marked the spot and rerouted the column. The mine itself became a part of the landscape to be worked around. Later, someone would cover the indentation with a sign or place a marker at a safer distance. But that formality was secondary to the immediate act, a measured extraction in a frozen field. The scene was not cinematic. There were no grand speeches, no moralizing gestures. It was procedural. It was human. To those prisoners, conditioned by fear and expectation, The restraint and the small comforts mattered. The warmth of a blanket, the protective posture of the soldiers, the fact that the guards did not pull away in suspicion or lash out in retribution. These were ordinary instruments of care, training and habit shaped into an action that carried unexpected compassion. Witnesses who later told this story emphasized how the moment lodged itself in memory, precisely because it ran counter to what they had been taught to expect. Survivors' accounts do not appear to have been recorded in official after-action dispatches. It was a detail that lived in testimony rather than archives, a human scene that official reports passed over. Decades later, it was recounted in quiet terms, not as a definitive statement about all interactions, but as an instance in which discipline and a small mercy intersected. This particular incident also highlights the invisible threats that non-combatant prisoners faced. Mines were not the dramatic danger of isolated battlefields. They were a persistent, mechanical risk underfoot. For forced marchers and detainees moving through territory abandoned by retreating units, every unmarked path could conceal a device placed to protect a withdrawal. That reality made movement itself fraught. It turned ordinary steps into tests of survival and compliance into a gamble. At the same time, the episode underscores the role that training and restraint played in saving lives. Military training does not guarantee humane behavior, nor does the presence of discipline erase cruelty. Yet in this case, it prescribed a sequence of actions calibrated to avoid harm. The guards' response, calm, methodical, unflamboyant, transformed a near disaster into a story of narrow deliverance. That transformation mattered to those who were captured. It reframed an expected narrative of brutality into one configured by a small human courtesy. Memory and official record rarely align neatly. Bureaucracies favor summaries and totals. They frequently omit the minor rhythms of daily life that mean the most to survivors. That silence does not make eyewitness testimony less valuable. If anything, what remains in memory, what people insist on telling, reveals a layer of wartime reality that statistics cannot capture. The private interactions, the small choices, the gestures that carried dignity or stripped it away. For the women on that road, the blanket, the careful hands, and the unspoken rules of cautious movement persisted as proof that wartime encounters could be complex and that not every moment fit into tidy narratives of enemy and ally. There is another quieter lesson in this roadside episode. Wars are often remembered in terms of great operations and grand strategy, maps, dates, commanders. Yet the human consequence of conflict often shows itself in small scenes. A hushed request, a measured response, an unmarked mine found beneath a boot. Those moments teach us about vulnerability and about how discipline and compassion can intersect without fanfare. They also remind us that the dangers faced by prisoners extended beyond the threat of violence from captors. The environment itself, weaponized through mines and hasty defenses, was a constant threat to bodies that had already been disempowered. We should also resist easy readings. This is not an argument that all interactions followed this pattern, nor that institutions behaved uniformly. It is a single, documented testimony of a narrow rescue in a vast and brutal theater. It preserves nuance, an instance of care amid a wider context of chaos and uncertainty. When the war ended months later, survivors carried these small stories into civilian life. Years on, some would still begin their accounts with that road, that breath, that impossible choice to speak up. Please, my foot is on a mine. That simple sentence became a hinge on which memory turned. It testified to what German female POWs faced in late 1944. The constant presence of hidden hazards, the layers of fear, and occasional unexpected interventions that preserved life and dignity in the midst of collapse. If this story moved you, share it. These small personal moments often slip through the cracks of official histories. Passing them on helps preserve the fuller picture of what war does, and what small acts of restraint and care can mean to those who survive it.